Hello everyone, good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So I'm going to talk about pointing and target selection for older users and media gesture interaction. So let's start. So before I start, can you raise your hand if you ever included people over the age of 60 in your user studies? And that doesn't include like assistive technology. Like I'm talking about ordinary interfaces. Good, one person. So let's start with the introduction. So media gesture interaction is becoming more and more popular. You have plenty of commercially available motion sensors. You have the Microsoft Kinect, you have the Leap Motion, the Myo armband, you have the HoloLens. You can apply media gesture interaction in gaming, augmented reality, virtual reality. We saw a few options here at the demonstrations. But we have plenty of gestures to be used, but the most used gesture is pointing for pointing and selection. However, the suitability of pointing is quite questionable, so it's important to try to investigate if it is suitable for a broad range of users as it's becoming popular. And also we have little research that focus on the needs and skills of older users. So one way of supporting older users in using media gesture interaction and also pointing gestures is providing suitable feedback or effective feedback. But feedback, the usefulness of feedback changes with the level of experience of the user and also the type of task. Today we don't have current standards for providing feedback and designing gesture-based interfaces that support older users, so basically age-friendly interfaces. But again, why study older users? So the population is becoming older. If you look at the graph, well, this conference is being held in Germany. Next year, the number of Germans older than 60 will be higher than the number of Germans younger than 30 years old. So my question again, do we really include older people in our user studies? So one thing is, we know that recruiting older people is more difficult than younger people, right? It's more difficult to find. But also there's a stereotype that older users are not actually users, they don't care about technology. And there's also this stereotype that older people, they don't understand technology, and that's not true. And again, older people will become the majority in a few years. Like, we are all going to be older and still use technology. So it's quite important to make sure that the skills and the needs of older people are supported by our interfaces. But this phenomenon is not just about Germany. The population is growing older everywhere. So it's quite important to make sure that people over the age of 65, for example, is included, and our interfaces are accessible and usable for the older population. So we are talking about media gesture interaction and pointing specifically. So older users are quite different from young users. So aging is related to a range of age-related decline in cognitive processing, sensory processing, and motor function. All these factors change how older people interact with gestures. So for example, if you look at the cognitive processing, it affects memory, it affects recall of information, it affects the spatial information as well. If you look at age-related decline in sensory processing, it it's related to vision impairment, hearing, limited hearing, tactile perception as well is affected. And if you see, most of the feedback we provide is based on these senses, and they are all affected by aging. So are we providing suitable feedback for older people? And most importantly, the motor functions are also affected. So we have limited range of motion. A person of age of 90 has 60% of a range of motion of a young person. So it's quite a change. You also have difficulties in making precise movements, which is quite important in pointing and selection in midair. You also have limited finger movements and dexterity. Moreover, older people usually have less familiarity with novel technology, so we can consider motion sensing technologies quite novel. So if you compare with younger people, they show less familiarity and might affect how they interact with gestures. So once more, HCI research often doesn't include older people in their user studies, so keep that in mind. So we conducted a target acquisition experiment that aimed to evaluate different feedback modalities to support pointing and target selection in midair for older users. So participants, they were asked to complete a target acquisition task consisting of 21 targets shown randomly on the screen. We actually just analyzed 20 of these targets because the first target it involved more of a repositioning of the hands, so we thought just to exclude from the analysis. Then participants were asked to locate the target by pointing and making a pinch gesture to select the target once it was located as fast as possible. And we were providing different feedbacks. I'm going to show a video to make it clear. So we included 6 feedback modalities in our study. We have unimodal visual feedback only, audio feedback, and haptic feedback. And then we have the combination of them. So we have visual plus audio, visual plus haptic, and audio plus haptic. The cognition order was counterbalanced across participants to minimize fatigue, which is quite important in midair, and learning effects. But before actually doing the task, they were provided a demo, so they would know how to actually use the leap motion, and it didn't affect the learning. So that's what we did. So first, we asked participants to locate a target by pointing in midair, and then they had to select the target by making a pinch gesture. So target design. Our target size was 150 pixels by 50 pixels. We didn't change the target size in our study. First, we thought about using a standard Fitts law study, but in our pilot, older people, they were struggling to select small sizes, and the leap motion wasn't quite accurate for the whole Fitts law study. So we decided to make a simple experimental design. So we didn't change target size, but target distances ranged from, so the index of difficulty from 1 to 1.5. So what happened? Oh, it's back? Good. Good. So the most important thing I want you to to show you. So the feedback design. So we included, as I said, we included 6 conditions. So the first one, you can see V is for visual. So every time participants located the target with the cursor, the target will go from gray to red. So we changed the contrast and the color. The second one was audio, A for audio, and play a constant tone while the cursor was inside the target. I'm going to try to show you the audio. So this was the audio feedback. So when the user located the target and the cursor was inside the target, they would hear this tone. There was no delay. The delay just now. Anyway, let's proceed. So the third condition was haptic feedback, and the haptic feedback was actually vibrotactile feedback. So we designed a wearable wristband that would vibrate while the target was located. And the design was informed by these 2 papers. And if you are interested, you can read it. They did a great job describing it. So it was vibrotactile feedback on the wrist. And then we had 3 combinations. We have visual plus audio, visual plus haptic, and audio plus haptic. So let's talk about our participants. So we recruited 25 older adults. Their age ranged between 60 and 83 years old. The mean age was 67. We had 13 male and 12 female. All participants, they reported previous computer experience. They also reported little experience with touchscreen devices, and no participant reported experience with media gesture interaction or motion sensors. We also tested their manual dexterity and also their psychomotor functions and their eye-hand coordination before the experiment. So if you can see in this picture, this is the experimental setting. You can see the leap motion, tracking all the movements. You can see the target on the screen, and the participant is wearing the haptic wristband and doing the pinch gesture for selection. So we analyzed and collected 3,000 trials in this study. I'm going to show you, hopefully, a video is going to work. So this participant, she was 73 years old, and she is completing the target acquisition task with the visual and audio feedback combined. You can't hear the audio properly, but the audio feedback, but let's try. So she receives feedback once she locates the target, and then she can do the pinch gesture. So we also have this other participant. He was actually the oldest. He was 83 years old. We found some common difficulties between participants. So one was actually the pinching. Sometimes it wasn't recognized by the leap motion, and also the target location. I'm going to explain more later. So this participant, she is only receiving visual feedback. So the results. So the target selection time. So the average selection time was 6.8 seconds per target, regardless of the feedback provided. We found a significant difference between the bimodal visual and audio feedback in comparison with visual plus audio separately. So yeah, visual plus audio was on average 6.2 seconds, and the longest was 7.4 seconds, which was the visual feedback only. We didn't find any significant differences between the other modalities. We also collected the number of target selection attempts. So on average, people needed 1.7 attempts to select a target successfully. But we didn't find any significant differences between all the 6 feedback modalities. We also collected the number of target slip-offs, which means how many times they exit the target without selecting it. And it was quite high. People needed 1.9 on average for each target. And again, we didn't find any differences. But then we found a significant difference for target selection time, but not for accuracy. So we tried to investigate it further. So we divided our participants into groups. The first group was the young, older, and the second group was the older. So we found, you can see in the graph, the first group was aged between 60 and 69, and we didn't find any differences between them. So feedback modality wasn't that important. But if you look at the second group, which is the older, so people aged 70 and plus, you found that visual and audio feedback combined helped and improved their performance. And the others not. After each condition, we also collected NASA TLX responses. So these are the subjective workload. As you can see, the visual and audio, the VA column, they received the lowest subjective workload, and it was significant difference between the other ones. But most importantly, we conducted this study to investigate the effects of feedback modality, but we found that target location on screen was more important than the feedback provided. So this is an example of target locations on the screen. You have the X and Y, and you have also right just on the side, you have the number, the time needed to select it successfully. So if you see on the top left, users needed 8.1 seconds to select it successfully. But if you look at the center, they needed just 4.5 seconds. If you see at the bottom left as well, 8.3 seconds. It might become, because most of our users are right-handed, so it's more like a technology-based issue, and the limitations of the leap motion. But it was quite an interesting finding. So target location on screen was fundamental for the accuracy and the time for selection. So other observations, the inclusion of the haptic wristband didn't improve the performance of older people. They actually, some people they found it annoying, the buzzing, and some people didn't really care. The preference also varied across participants. Some people preferred visual feedback only, some people preferred audio because they didn't need to look at the screen. Also, visual feedback only had a limitation that sometimes the hand would be in the way of the target, so the user couldn't see actually couldn't see the target, so they found it annoying. And fatigue is nothing new, but fatigue was noted by many participants. It was quite a short task. It was only 20 targets, but some participants found shoulder pains and arm pains, and so it's quite important to be mindful of muscle strength as well. So one of our main findings is older people aged between 60 and 69 selected targets in 6 seconds, but older adults aged 70 and older, they needed 8.2 seconds on average, which is quite high. We conducted a pilot with young people, and they needed, on average, only 2 seconds to select each target. So again, it's important to include older people in your studies. As well, limited movement control, more sleep-offs, more misselections, and were more present in the older group in comparison with the older. So other findings, so issues related to lip motion, not being able to recognize the pinch, was very frustrating for older people. And actually pointing and locating targets wasn't that the problem. So minimizing the need of repeating the gestures is quite important for older people. And it's more important in our study, at least, than the feedback provided. And again, target location on screen affected both the selection time and the accuracy of target selection. So this is just a simple representation of what we found. So the areas in red were the problematic ones. So all the targets located in red needed more time to be selected and more attempts. The area in green was easier for older people to use. But again, most of our users were right-handed, so it might affect results. So this is one of the design recommendations. If you want your gesture-based interface to be age-friendly, you should probably locate your targets in the green area. Hopefully no one is colorblind. So takeaways, combined bimodal visual and audio feedback lead to faster target selection, but not improved performance. Like it didn't lead to less errors. So again, effect of the other feedback combinations were not relevant. The accuracy of pointing and selection was not affected by the feedback modality, only selection time. And again, target location on screen showed to be more important than the feedback we were providing. And one more time, so older people, they consist of a highly diverse group. So some people might present a higher decline in visual processing. Some people may present limited hearing, others less tactile perception. So multimodal feedback is quite important if you want your interface to be age-friendly. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, I could probably just talk in the room here. How did you decide what the right amplitudes were for an appropriate level of salience?
What do you mean?
Because an older person's hearing might degrade, and so did you use the same volume for everybody on the audio feedback and the haptic feedback?
Uh,
Or did you modify it based on what you thought the perceptual capabilities were?
Yeah, so we tested, we assessed our participants beforehand. So we use only one audio type and haptic type for all participants.
For all participants?
Yes.
Okay. Kyle?
So as I'm getting older, I'm realizing age is just a number. And so, when I see that it's sort of grouped into sort of these low and high groups, it sort of bothers me a little bit that, there's a big difference between someone who's 60, who's in very good health, and one who's not. And I wonder, did you do a fit between age and any of these variables, or did you look at sub-characteristics?
Yeah, so we only recruited healthy participants. And that includes all kind of health conditions like dementia and disabilities and stuff. And we also evaluated their motor functions and their cognitive functions as well. So basically they were all healthy. If you compare these healthy older people with people with some kind of cognitive decline, there will be like a huge difference. So we were talking about ordinary older people.
More question of Zoe?
So, as a member of your target, thank you for doing this. I'm curious, you mentioned at the very end you did a target study with younger people, and at the time there was a very large difference in the time. But I'm wondering about some of the other things, like did younger people have equal problems with the leap, recognizing their gestures, and in particular with the distribution, spatial distribution? Was that something that was observed only with older people, or was that observed with everyone?
Yes, so we conducted earlier study that we compared young people and older people. So these are challenges that only older people face. And we wanted to look specifically at how to support older people in using pointing and selection in midair. So in our study, young people didn't present that much challenges. So that's why we only did this study with young people, older people. But in our when we were piloting this study, we included young people, and but it was just for piloting. But these problems that I reported today was mainly for older people. Yes.
All right. While Zach sets up, so if you unplug your video, thank you. We'll have one last question. Oh, okay.
Hey, thank you for your presentation. Maybe can you lose some thoughts on your future work? Maybe how are you planning to proceed now? Investigating another feedback modality, or thinking about gestural interaction or user interface? Maybe if you lose some thoughts on that.
So we are now developing adaptive gestures. So that adapts to the motor function of each user. So it's more like machine learning based. So it's adaptive and predictive. So instead of providing feedback, we are making the interface adapt to the user's gesture characteristics.